And we're live.
Can we hear us? I hope we can hear us. I'm here. Hi, I'm Django Wexler, and I'm here with Q&A for Brian McClellan. So thank you, everybody, and welcome. I see we have some questions already, so let's get started. So brief introductions. My new book, Ashes of the Sun, just came out yesterday, so I'm very excited about that. I'm excited to finally share that with everyone. It feels like it's been forever. Apart from that, I've written the Shadow Campaigns, which is what sort of joined me at the hip to Brian, since we had those come out like within a month of each other some 5 years ago. And no, it's got to be longer than that. 8 years ago.
That was 7 years ago.
Yeah, jeez. And I've also done YA in the Wells of Sorcery and middle grade for the Forbidden Library. So that's me. And Brian?
I'm Brian McClellan. I write epic fantasy as well, and I'm known for the Powder Mage books, which is kind of gunslinging epic fantasy, magic based on black powder kind of stuff. Django and I each had our Flintlock fantasy debut come out. Let's see, mine was April 2013.
Yeah, and I think mine was like March or maybe June. It was very close.
Yeah, it was really close.
It just meant that people kept making lists of like books coming out this year, and they're like Django Wexler and Brian McClellan, so we kept ending up in the same kind of events.
Yeah, pretty funny. So yeah, we have been joined at the hip a little bit. So I've got 6 Powder Mage books out. I recently finished the last one in December, Blood of Empire, and that wrapped up that universe. And I have an ongoing self-pubbed urban fantasy series called Valkyrie Collections, about a collection agent for the supernatural. I've got a whole bunch of projects in the works, but yeah, those are way distant from here, so we'll leave those to the side for now.
Yeah, I just got the 6th book. They look very handsome on the shelf together. It's very impressive.
It's a fantastic set, and I'm really sad that the hardcovers are really hard to find already. But that's what happens when you only get one hardcover run.
Yeah, that's the book life. All right, so shall we look at these questions and see what people have to say?
Sounds great.
All right. Top question is, what is your process like when starting a new project or creating a new world? Any tips you can share to help manage the pre-writing process?
Whew.
This must be relevant to you right now, because I feel like, that's kind of what you're into. And me too, obviously, since I just...
Right. Like, this is a weird question, because I feel like other authors always seem to be able to like spout out exactly what they do. And like, I'm like, gosh, I'm something like 9 novels and a bunch of short fiction into my career. And every single time it seems to be a little bit different. And it's kind of a weird one. Like, so I did my new God Glass book that I just turned it in like 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
And that one, thanks. It's a big one. It's my biggest book by far, and that's a big new epic fantasy world. And that one was like, oh gosh, that one gestated for like 2 years. And then when I finally worked on it, like the working itself was probably the longest I've worked on a book, probably around 13 months or so. And it required way more trial and error than I'd done before. And it felt like a very different experience, with 4 point of views, and it required a lot more organization than I'd done before. And it ended up massive, lots more political intrigue and all that sort of stuff. And so for like that one versus say the Powder Mage books, I had kind of like I always started with kind of a bit of a brief summary, and then I would kind of wing it, and then I'd stop every so often. I'd reorganize my thoughts. I'd try to get a little bit more on track, and I'd develop the outline a little more. But I did a lot of winging it with the Powder Mage books, even the first one. And that's your first book's always different though, because you're young and optimistic.
I know. It often takes longer too, right? Like, how long did the first one take you?
Honestly,
4 years.
you hate me for this because it was like 9 months.
Oh wow.
It was like super quick, and then my agent forced me to rewrite most of it.
Oh wow.
I got an agent, and she said, "Yeah, this is cool, but you're like 24, and you're clearly a beginner, and I'm gonna make you rewrite most of it." And so we did, and it was better.
Harsh
Um,
luck
but,
from agents.
but yeah, and so like I guess for each book, my process it gets a little bit more refined. Um, and I try to become a little bit more organized about it and focus in on the stuff that you read about in all of those in like the classes. Like you'll watch one of Brandon's classes, the lectures, or you'll listen to writing excuses or all those different things the resources that you have to learn about writing. I try to get better about being scientific about it each time, but man, there's so much winging it left in there.
That's part of the fun, so I feel like you wouldn't want to get that out entirely.
Yeah, and I think that is
your
true.
job. You do kind of need like.
Sorry, I'll let you answer this in a moment. I'm just
No, go ahead.
Real quick. I started a new book right after I turned in my last one, and this one it's a new series, something that was just kind of niggling around the back of my mind, and this one I decided to do totally different. Speaking of process, so I spent about 4 days doing a really tight outline. About 26 chapters, really short. It's only going to be around 80,000 words. I spent about 4 days doing a really tight outline, and I was pretty happy with it. And then, I've been writing, and I'm already, about a sixth of the way through the book. And I'm looking at that and going, man, this is way easier than writing epic fantasy.
Well, it's funny. I have a similar story, right? So I used to hate outlining. I used to be a dedicated, I'm going to, pants everything. And I finished 1,000 Names. It took me like 3 years-ish because I rewrote it a million times. And then I got the agent and we were going to go sell it to the publishers. And he said, well, we need an outline for the rest of the series to sell to the publishers. And I was like, I don't want to write an outline. It's too hard. I don't want to do it. So I finally did it, and it was like the hardest month of writing I had done to date. And I was like, that was a pain in the butt. And then when the time came to write the second book, I couldn't help but notice it was so much easier, and it went so much faster. And I was like, oh God, maybe there's something to this after all. So like everyone has their own way, obviously, and some people never do outlines, and that's totally fine. But for me, I'm like a convert, and now I write these long outlines. My outlines are usually about 1/10 the size of the finished book. So if the book is 100,000 words, the outline will be 10,000 words.
Dang.
And it's just, I remember in book 4 of Shadow Campaigns, I had a character come in fairly late, and my editor had read the outline and was like, I think we should bring her in chapter 2. And man, is that an easier change to make in outline form than to have to go through and rewrite all those chapters to accommodate the fact that there's this extra person who needs help.
Oh,
go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I get frustrated with long outlines, like for long books. I mean, long complex books, I find I outline way less, and I get really angry with outlines because I'll get to like chapter 4 and I'll be like, oh wait, there's something really small and dumb that totally changes the structure. I just wasted all my time without outline, and I've got to change 3 different points of view, and I've got to rearrange where characters are and all this stuff. And it'll be something that I didn't pick up while I was outlining, but it'll be small.
Though is if you do the same thing, but like what happens to me is I'll start and like actually writing the draft, and I'll get to chapter 4 and then be like, oh man, now I have to rewrite 10,000 words of actual prose. I feel like changing the outline is the lesser of 2 evils, but I guess that doesn't happen to you.
See, outlines tend, especially the more complex ones, they'll take me weeks, and I hate it. I can rewrite 10,000 words in a day and a half.
Oh, okay.
And so like that doesn't bother me.
It's my least favorite task. But what I was about to say is I agree with you that every book is different in terms of how you do the prep. Because for me, how I come to a book is often different. Sometimes it'll be like, okay, I have this character and I really know what he or she is about, and I kind of got to figure out what the world is. And sometimes it'll be like, there's a plot that I really want to do, or sometimes it'll be that there's a world design I really want to do. Like Shadow Campaigns was probably more, okay, I've got, Napoleon and the Napoleonic Wars, and that's what I want to do. And whereas Ashes of the Sun is much more about the two main characters were sort of the first part. So it really depends on where the kind of fixed point is, the sort of inspiration, like, okay, this is what I want to do in this book. Sometimes it's a magic system or whatever, and then you kind of build out all the rest of the stuff to support it, right? If you have a particular plot, then you build the magic system so that it makes that plot work.
Yeah.
And so on. So it varies pretty widely.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think that complexity and length and all sorts of different things are going to affect what your process is. Like I imagine somebody like I don't know, like Terry Brooks or Lee Modisett, those kind of old hands, but have been the people that have been writing in the same universes, kind of the same length of books with similar characters over the course of 40 years or whatever. Those guys, I imagine that they know exactly what they're doing at all times.
You can keep the whole book in your head at that stage.
Yeah, and it's a practiced thing.
When people ask for writing advice, though, the one thing I always am careful to say is it's so varied. It depends, and it's really different for everyone. So you just got to try a bunch of stuff and see kind of what works for you personally.
Yeah. Writing is one of those things that if you study it a lot, if you spend a lot of time, with those resources I was talking about earlier, you are going to learn the science of it. But even people that get very good at that are still they're still in a lot of ways, throwing shit against the wall to see what sticks.
Well, it's sort of idiosyncratic, right? Like that, there's something that'll work for some people, but not others. Neil Gaiman writes everything with a fountain pen, but that doesn't mean you have to go out and do that. Or like Kevin J. Anderson apparently just like goes for long walks in the desert with a voice recorder and just talks into it for hours and then comes home and some minion transcribes it and then
that sounds awful.
Yeah, well,
both of those things sound awful.
I mean, but that's the thing, what works for you. My friend Cat Rambo uses like Dragon Dictate to type everything.
Yeah, I can't even imagine listening to the sound of my own voice for that.
Oh God, I would go crazy.
Yeah,
all right.
For real.
What else we got here? What are some? Oh, go ahead. You want to read?
On to the next one here. So, what are some books that you read to keep you inspired, or that you just read for fun while writing?
I try to keep reading all the time. I always have at least a fiction book and a nonfiction book going at once, and usually an audiobook also. It's been a little, one of the things that pandemic has done to my brain has made it harder to read. I just don't have the focus. So I'm still reading, but just more slowly. But generally, I'm always reading some kind of fiction. I try to keep up with cool stuff in the genre, cool stuff from my friends, stuff they send me to blurb, that kind of thing. So that varies pretty widely. I read a lot of history. Sort of military history is one of my specialties, and economic history. Those are good to read before writing, I think, because the style tends to be a little neutral. I think of it almost as like a palate cleanser, right? Like a history book doesn't usually have a really strong narrative voice, so it can kind of get me into a more neutral place. But yeah, so lots of stuff. And sometimes I'll read something in the genre that I'm supposed to be writing just to kind of like get my brain in the right space. Like right now I'm working on a middle grade thing, so I just read Yoon-Ha Lee's Dragon Pearl, which is a middle grade space opera. That's really good. You guys should read that. What about you?
I'm going to be the awful person that says I don't really read fiction anymore.
Oh, no.
And this is one of those, this is like a small regret that I have. Like you talk, like some of those guys, like Joe Abercrombie will talk about how like he's really never read epic fantasy. It's just not a thing he does. I used to read every single thing I could get my hands on, and I just voracious, and there was some point, probably somewhere in the first 3 years of being a pro writer, that something clicked in my brain that was just like, oh, this is my job now. I don't want to do it for fun.
That's hard.
And so yeah, I still do get sent books occasionally, but like I don't really read them. If it's a close friend, I will try to get to it, but often then I'll end up kind of skimming through and kind of getting the Spark Notes version, and it's frustrating to me because I used to love it so much, and now I'm just so not interested. Like it's a job.
Do you do audiobooks at all?
I do. So what I do is nonfiction, historical audiobooks and podcasts.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much all I read these days. Is that, and they're a blast. And like you said, it's a great palate cleanser. It's a neutral voice. It's interesting stuff that can be inspiring for what I write. And that is great and really fun. But in terms of fiction, I barely touch anything. And, I barely even watch TV that much anymore. I'm just now.
Your time.
I play a lot of video games.
Okay.
That's
good. I was like, I hope you're not just like writing all day.
No, I'm just now watching Avatar: Last Airbender.
Oh wow.
And like, I'm so behind on everything. I watch a lot of comedy. I watch a lot of like kind of British panel shows and stuff like that. But it's because that doesn't use the part of my brain that I use for creative.
Yeah, it's not narrative.
Yeah, it's totally mindless, funny. I can laugh at it, and then I can go to bed. And so like trying to watch, I used to watch tons of like crime dramas and stuff like that, but I don't even go back and watch Law and Order anymore because it's just like, oh, it's another story that I have to engage with like I do my day job. And that frustrates the crap out of me because I used to find so much joy in that stuff and I just don't anymore.
That's really interesting. All right. Next on the list. You are both the go-to recommendations for the Flintlock fantasy genre, but is there anything else in the genre people should be reading?
Ooh, so that one, so that's tough for me because I don't do that much reading anymore. But I'm vaguely aware. So one of the last series that I was reading kind of before my brain told me I didn't really want to read that much anymore was the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks, and that one it's kind of Flintlock. It's the right.
Okay, I haven't read that one.
Yeah, it's the right era.
I've read some of his other stuff, but not that. And
yeah, I think he kind of goes for like 1600s-ish technology, whereas both of us use kind of early 1800s.
I guess that's technically Matchlock or something.
Yeah.
I think they had the Flintlock yet. But like, yeah. Like, I think Three Musketeers-ish.
Right. And I think like one of his characters was gifted a Flintlock at one point and talks about how it's this cutting edge technology.
Yeah.
But like, so that's like kind of the last one that I like, that I'm really actually read. But I know like, it's Adrian
Tchaikovsky, that's what I was going to mention.
Okay, yeah. Adrian Tchaikovsky, I know, does write some.
He writes a ton of stuff. Adrian Tchaikovsky is great, and I recommend all of his books. My personal favorite.
I read his Bug series. The
Shadows of the Apt is his.
Yeah, I read that forever ago. That was great.
If my personal favorite is called Children of Time, which is about a planet that is seeded with a virus that causes things to super evolve, with the plan to plant some monkeys there and see if they evolve into like new humans. But the ship with the monkeys has an accident, and so it ends up evolving intelligent spiders by the time humans actually get there. And there's this planet full of intelligent spiders. It's amazing. But anyway, he wrote a book called The Guns of the Dawn. I think it's Guns of the Dawn. There might be an extra "the" in there somewhere, which is a Flintlock fantasy about a world in which they're having this kind of Napoleonic War, and the thing that happens is that their country has gotten so desperate that they've started drafting women to fight when they never have before, and how that sort of impacts their social mores and these women who have to go off to fight for the first time. It's really good. I highly recommend it.
That's very cool.
I was gonna say other Flintlock. It's not that popular a period. You know, I'm probably leaving someone out who's gonna like angrily remind me. Robin Bennis's
I've got like a bunch of covers in my brain that I can see. I don't remember who wrote them.
Robin Bennis's The Guns Above is.
Oh, that was one of the ones I was trying to think of.
Well, yeah, it's Napoleonic airships basically with, you know, cannons and not much magic, just a kind of pretty straightforward implementation of that. That one was really solid. China Meeville's Perdido Street Station technically takes place in a Flintlock universe, but they have so much magic there that it's kind of unrecognizable. But those are really great too. So those are the two that immediately spring to mind. All right.
That's cool. Okay, so who's your favorite character in your own books?
That's a tough one. Who's my favorite character in my own books? I can't pick favorites. It's like picking favorite children, right? It's impossible. You know, obviously, I really like Winter in the Shadow Campaigns books. You know, she was not part of the original plan for the books and kind of like took over the story because that character was just so compelling. If we're not talking main characters, I always really like Sight is Winter's kind of love interest later in the books, and she's kind of like a weird, awkward nerd like me, so I always kind of have a soft spot for her. So that'd be my answer. What about you?
I, at least for the two Powder Mage books, you know, like there's or the two Powder Mage series.
I was gonna say by two you mean 6.
Yeah, the two trilogies. Each trilogy I had a favorite character to write. And the first one was Field Marshal Tomas, who's this kind of old, you know, like past his prime, like he's the greatest general in living history. And he's the guy who basically starts the series by overthrowing the king, and then a bunch of crap happens. But he was just a blast to write, because my least favorite trope in epic fantasy is the farm boy who's good at everything. Mm-hmm. And so it was a blast to write a guy who was just, he had seen it all, he had done it all, and he was sick of everyone's shit. And that just, it was just so fun. And it was just, yeah, I really enjoyed that one. And the second series, my favorite one to write, that one was, that's a little tougher because, like, I think overall it was Ben Steich, who was this 7-foot giant of a man who was crippled from years of hard labor, forced labor, and kind of returned to try to have some vengeance, and ended up being, and was one of the main characters of the series, and he was fun to write in kind of a similar way as Field Marshal Tomas. I have a type of character I enjoy, mm-hmm. and I think that's maybe a little bit of self-insert in terms of, not that it's
because you too are a 7-foot giant of a man,
right?
Crushed with his bare hands, right?
Not that it's me, but that it's that they have a certain attitude. You know, like I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis when I was 20. I have felt like an old man my whole life.
That's really
and so like writing old characters really just comes easy to me. And so those two characters, probably my favorite. You know, there's always secondary characters that like I kind of love a bit. But I try not to pour too much into them, because then it's super obvious that I love them.
Well, also you can overuse it. You know, I have several secondary characters who are like, they have a particular trait. Usually it's like a comic relief thing, like Give 'em Hell in Shadow Campaigns books is this sort of comically overeager cavalry officer of the sort of old British type, which I always find really funny to write. Or there's a character in in Ashes named Varro, who's his shtick is always he tells these stories about his adventures with his friends, which always end with his friends being horribly killed, right? And that this is just like this running gag throughout the story, and the other characters sort of come to expect it, and there you can do a bunch of variations. So the key with that, like those are always really fun characters, but the key is like sparingly, because like if you overuse a joke, it becomes lame.
Yeah, my favorite joke that I'm not even sure anyone's noticed is always naming a pub or an inn the dumbest first thing to come into my head. And I love doing it, and my wife always rolls her eyes, and I always leave it in.
There's one in Ashes. The pub's name is the Smoking Wreckage, which I always thought was wonderful. All right. Let's see. What was the most surprising thing for you about becoming a published author? Is it all how you imagined it?
Ooh, man, it's just like it's only been I've only been writing full time for 8 years. My first book came out 7 years ago, but it also feels like an eternity.
I know, right? Weird.
Like I don't even remember what it was like to not be a published author.
Was it XKCD that said like it's weird that I'm constantly surprised by the passage of time, even though it's the most predictable thing in the universe?
Yeah, like that's totally true. I think becoming published, I always had this kind of grandiose idea of what it was like. And I think when you become published, you suddenly realize that the world that is publishing, the business, is incredibly tiny compared to most businesses, at least most global businesses. It's incredibly tiny. Everybody kind of knows each other and kind of has heard of each other. So I guess I was shocked by how small it is. But then you reach a point where you're kind of humming along comfortably in your career, and then you realize you haven't heard of any of these people that everyone's talking about anymore. And you're like, wait a second, am I out of touch? Are there more authors out there than I thought there were? Oh, wait, that person's self-publishing, but they also make 10 times as much money as I do, but I've never heard of them. Like, it's such a weird business.
It's very siloed too. Like if you get into it and you'll meet all the SFF people if you're like Brian and I and you work in SFF. But then like just across the hall in like horror or romance or whatever, other genres, there's a whole structure that you'll never even hear about, and people can be enormous deals and you just like have no idea.
Yeah.
It's very, very separated in that way.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest, the just how weird the industry is. Like I could probably talk about that for 4 hours. So
it's a strange industry.
Yeah.
For me, it was like I published with a small press in 2005 a book called Memories of Empire, and then another one called Shinigami. And I definitely had some very unrealistic ideas about what being an author would be like at the time. I was like, I'm going to have fans, and we're going to have like, and this is a tiny, like, I think we printed 2,000 copies of Memories of Empire total in the history of the thing, like a teeny little thing. And so obviously that didn't work out. And in a way, it's kind of good because I feel like that sort of disabused me of a lot of my preconceptions. I'm like, oh, it's a thing. But, I also think I made probably $1,500 total from that process. And yet still people will sometimes know those books, which always shocks me. I'm like, we only printed about 800 copies of Shinigami. How have you even heard of it?
I always laugh at that idea, that the kind of that new author naivete, because like, yeah, I totally had it. I remember like there was a point I reached where I had been publishing for like 4 or 5 years, and I realized that I am very mildly famous, and I make a really good living off of doing this, and I have a signing and like 3 people show up.
I know, right?
Like,
it's so true.
It's very weird. Like,
It's amazing the difference between, I write for a living, and I'm incredibly lucky to be able to do that. And there are many people who would love to be in my position, and yet then you look up at Brandon or whoever, and they can fill a soccer stadium with fans, and you're like, the heights to which one could theoretically get to is always, you get to one step and you're like, oh, I'm still at the base of this mountain.
Well, and it's like playing pro ball, like you can, if you pitch for AAA baseball, nobody knows who you are. You make a decent living, but you're still in like the 0.1% of your field.
Right. Yeah, you're still like a better ball player than almost anyone in the world.
It's just that the guys who go on to pitch for the Yankees are way like millions ahead of you.
It's a weird thing. But yeah, so by the time I actually got to 1,000 Names, which was my first like big press publication, I had lost my preconceptions. Although even then, launch day was sort of anticlimactic, right? Like, book comes out, I'm so excited. I post on Twitter, I go drive to the bookstore, I sign the 3 copies that they have, and then I go home and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess that was it. I learned to like plan some sort of fancy dinner or something to like at least celebrate with my friends.
Yeah, my kick in the pants was launch day was great because I launched in an area where I had lots of family and friends and where I grew up and all that. And launch day was great. We had 100 people come. It did awesome. And then I think it was my first signing at a bookstore, like a few months later, where I didn't have anybody show up for me. And then I sold like 1 book to a nice old lady that was buying for her looking for a present for a kid, a grandkid. And that was my like reality check.
When about a week after my first book came out, Ace Rock sent me to San Diego Comic-Con. I was on a panel with Pat Rothfuss and Brandon Sanderson and Raymond Feist and Robin Hobb and a few other people I've probably forgotten. And it was really interesting because like it was fun to talk to these people, and it really, I was super nervous, but like everyone was very nice to me. But like also I was like, okay, be careful on the panel because like nobody is here to see you, person who published a book a week ago, right? And then there was the signing afterwards, and they had very cleverly arranged it so that like we were in sort of reverse order of famousness, and the line wound past those of us who were less famous. So I got to like pitch my book to all these people who were waiting in line for Brandon and Pat.
That's fantastic.
All right.
Okay, so my turn or your turn?
I think it's your turn.
Okay. When it comes to writing a fantasy story, what comes first? The characters, the world, the plot, or the dilemma?
We covered a little bit of this earlier. I mean, for me, it really varies, right? Sometimes it's like, okay, I want to write this, World War II, but with this kind of magic in it. And that's like a setting, and then I have to come up with characters and a plot. Sometimes it's like, I want to write this, brother and sister who are at war over this philosophical concept, and then like, I got to come up with a world that makes that work support. So it can really be anything. It depends sort of what the initial inspiration is.
Yeah, agreed. It's, so my first Powder Mage trilogy, I think I came up with, I think maybe, it's been so long I don't remember, but I think Field Marshal Tomas was a character before I really had the world. I really liked a Napoleon sort of character that I wanted to play with. And then I ended up going with the powder magic pretty quickly after that. And then from there it was developing the kind of the plot and what drives the plot. The world itself is like, that's like always the last for me, because I develop the world around the plot to serve it. And especially like a map is the last thing, because I'm changing around where things are and what the character has to travel to and do. So
in a way, that's what I love about fantasy, is that like you can configure the world to support the kind of story that you want to tell, right? Yeah. Like, Powder Mage wouldn't work if the magic system was, Wheel of Time or Malazan Book of the Fallen. And so like you pick the magic system and you pick the sort of characteristics of the world so that it works with the story that you want to tell.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm this book I'm currently kind of pounding out right now. It's sci-fi ostensibly, but I totally got, like, while I was working on the outline, I just said, yeah, you know what? The planet they're on is definitely magic, so I don't have to do any research.
That's pretty good.
So I have to do minimal research.
All right. Next one is, I'm skipping the one that Orbit has answered here. The next one is, tell us about your cats.
Well, you have a couple, don't you?
I do. I was going to say, a French magazine once interviewed me, and they said, is it required for all fantasy authors to have cats? And I said, yes, because if you don't have a cat, you will be issued one when your book releases. The publisher will just send you a cat. Yes, I have 2 cats. Their names are Tomo and Sakaki. They are sort of orange and black. You can see them if you come to my Twitter. I'm frequently posting pictures of cats. You have dogs too, right? Or no?
So I have 1 dog and 1 cat.
Okay.
My cat is Leto Atreides McClellan.
Nice.
And he is an enormous snowshoe Siamese. And you can see pictures of him on my Instagram and Twitter. He's my favorite. And then I also have a little dog. She's just a little mutt, and she's adorable. And she's a Winry Rockbell McClellan.
After Full Metal Alchemist.
Yep. But they're cute kids.
Mine are from Azumanga Daioh, and originally Tomo was this kind of rampaging one, as his namesake is in that show. But he's 13 now, and he's just kind of this big old fat cat who just wants to cuddle. He's the sweetest thing. All right. What else?
So this one is a question for me, apparently, and it's quick. Brian, do you intend to take your world into their future of the 1900s? I assume you're talking about Powder Mage. I don't. I've thought about it a couple of times. The idea is kind of fun, but I've said a bunch of times that the Powder Mage is just done. That's not necessarily true. I might come back to it at some point.
I might have been lying.
Yeah. Like it's one of those things where I'm done for now. I've got one big thing under contract. I've got 1 self-published series going, and I have another series that apparently I just started in the last 2 weeks. So I've got so much going on that Powder Mage is very low on the list of priorities.
That's kind of how I feel. Like, people ask, are you going to do more shadow campaigns? And I'm like, I have this file that's like idealfile.doc, and it's like 30 pages long, and there's all these cool things. Like, some of the stuff in there is crap, obviously, but like there's all these cool things that I want to do, and like obviously, my time is limited, and so I try to stick to new cool stuff. All right, here's one. What are your favorite video games, and have they influenced your writing?
What
are your favorite video games, Brian?
Man, it depends on the day. I could bring up my Steam account and tell you which one has the most hours in.
Is favorite synonymous with how many hours? Because
I don't think it is. Because you can have a favorite game that's like a linear game that you just play once or twice through, and you thought it was gorgeous and amazing, and you'll always remember it. And you can have games that are like, that are just good, repeatable, brain cleansing sort of fun. And that's what I drift towards. So like, I mean, I have like 5,000 hours in the Civilization franchise.
I was going to say, you're never going to put as many hours into an RPG as you will into Civ.
Yeah, and so like I adore Civ. I definitely count it as one of my favorites. But like, there's a couple others. There's Oxygen Not Included is a fantastic little base building game, survival game. And let's see, the Don't Starve and Don't Starve Together is just a fantastic game. It's the same sort of premise. Is it the same company? I think it's the same company. It's a base building game, the survival game. It's really fun. And let's see, I played for about 30 minutes this morning. The Long Dark is a survival first-person survival game where your plane crashed in the Arctic after some sort of apocalypse
Oh
happened.
no.
You're like in an Arctic, like near Arctic towns, and you have to survive with the temperature plumbing and wolves trying to kill you, and it's a really like contemplative, quiet game that I'll put on like a podcast and I'll play this game, and it's a huge amount of fun.
Have you played Frostpunk?
I played through it once. I beat it, and then
Yeah.
I haven't played any of the updates or anything like that. I beat it like 2 days after it came out, and it was fun.
It just reminds me of that plot with the plummeting temperature.
Yeah, and I liked that game a lot. I really should go back to it because I understand they've done a ton of work on it.
I tend to go to either sort of very narrative games with stories or sort of simulation wide open type games. So I have also played a ton of Civ. I play like Crusader Kings 2 is one of my eternal favorites, and Stellaris. I play a lot of Factorio, which is this factory building game. I feel like that for me scratches the old itch of being a computer programmer, which was my like job in my former life, because it has a lot of similarities to that. So stuff like that, but then also like I just finished The Last of Us 2, which I really enjoyed. Persona 5 is this amazing JRPG that I'm just like super in love with. I think it's the only JRPG that I've played through like twice. Because
is that Sega Atlas US or something like that?
I think so. I think it's Atlas.
They sent me that game, and
Persona 5?
Yeah, I played the first like hour and nothing happened.
Yeah,
I got frustrated and quit.
The thing about Persona, I don't always recommend it to everyone because like I think Persona 5 is probably the best JRPG ever made, in my opinion.
Huh.
But it is like very JRPG. So like if you're not into just like long text dialogues and like wandering around talking to people before you even get to fight anything, then like it's not the game for you. It's, you know, it is very much what it is. And so if people don't like it, then like 100% respect that. You have to be into that kind of game.
Yeah, I missed out. I didn't have consoles as a kid, and so like I have friends that were console kids, and they love JRPGs, and they'll tell me everything about them. And I never had consoles. I was always like I had a computer. I played like Dune 2 and like the early strategy games from Westwood, and you know and that's what I got into.
The first multiplayer computer game I ever played was the original Warcraft, and I was dialing my friend Graham over our modems, like not through any internet service. I was literally just calling his house over to use the modem connection. And that just like blew me away. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I can play it. We're not even in the same house.
That's fantastic.
But do you feel like anything has had an influence on your writing? I don't know.
Ooh. Like I look at maybe like the 4X games, which is what Civ.
Yeah.
Like I think that they do click with me in a way because I love the big expansiveness of it in the way I love the expansiveness of epic fantasy.
I've definitely learned stuff from Crusader Kings. Mm-hmm. It's accurate enough that I feel like there are things I understand better now after playing it.
Definitely.
And then obviously, you know, every story, you know, the narrative games, the stories kind of find their way in there the same as books or movies or whatever. But.
Yeah, but I tend to try to play games to unwind rather than learn something. So I maybe like it's one of those things that's definitely leaked in, but it's never been on purpose.
All right, you want to pick one, Brian?
Yeah, here I'll jump back up to the top because our voting is happening.
Yeah.
So Django, you are writing for different age groups. Which one is the most challenging to write? And Brian, you seem settled in adult fantasy. Any plans on branching out?
I don't know that one is more challenging than the others. It's actually kind of great to switch between them because you get a bit of a break. Like, the nice thing about the middle grades is that they're short and relatively simple. Not simple in terms of the language necessarily. I try not to sort of write down, so you know that I just keep the style I always have, basically. But they're simpler structurally. There's usually just one point of view character. You have a sort of straight through line of the plot. You don't have, a lot of things that are out of order, or flipping between POVs or anything like that. And so I remember when I was doing Shadow Campaigns and Forbidden Library, sort of alternating between them, it was actually kind of great because I'd finish Shadow Campaigns, which are these monstrous 200,000 word books, and I'd start the Forbidden Library book, and I get to 60, 70,000 words. I'm like, oh, it's over. I finished already. It's done. And it's just so refreshing. It's just this story, and you start at the beginning and you follow this character through and you get to the end. And it's like, oh, that's really easy. But then you do that for too long and you start wanting the kind of more complex, more sort of morally gray stuff of the big adult fantasies. So, it's been fun to go back and forth. And YA is kind of in between those things because it has some restrictions, but very few. I think, you can't swear. I think that's about the only difference. It's a little weird that you can't swear, but you can have decapitations, but that's what they don't.
Yeah, I've talking to my friends that do YA, there's these weird rules, it's oh, if you do a certain subgenre of YA, it can have really graphic sex in it, or if you do this other subgenre, it can be really lots of violence, and it's I have no idea.
It weirded me out, in Ship of Smoke and Steel, we have 2 decapitations in the first 3 chapters, but still can't have graphic sex. They still can't say the F word.
Yeah,
a bunch of swear words, which is always fun.
I guess all my published books so far have all been adult fantasy. The book that I just started, I'm not doing anything differently. I'm just writing it in my normal voice, but everything about it codes as YA. And so I sent the outline to my agent 3 days ago, and I haven't heard back from what she thinks of it yet. But she will almost certainly, when we talk, say, Brian, this is a YA. And
which
so,
fine. I mean,
yeah, fine. I'm not really doing anything different. I don't have graphic sex in any of my books. I only swear a lot in the Valkyrie Collections books. I'm not, it's one of those things where I'm not trying to do it differently, but everything about the summary of the book and the main characters and all that stuff, it all codes as YA. So
YA is a tricky genre, and there are famously many arguments over sort of what constitutes it. Ultimately, I think it was Hugo Gernsback who said science fiction is whatever science fiction editors buy, and YA is kind of whatever YA editors buy.
I can see that.
I mean, there's a few things you probably couldn't do a YA with Field Marshal Thomas as your main character. I don't think it would work. I think you need some teenager somewhere, but otherwise,
something year-old character's not going to work for YA.
It's pretty open.
Yeah.
So, all right. Let's see what else. What's going on here? All right. What has been the most helpful business thing you've learned as an author?
Man, I've learned a bunch of business stuff as an author, because you kind of, depending on how much variation you have. I was talking to Django right before the stream about that I run a little bookstore on my website, so that people can get signed copies from me. And so there's lots of little things that are really kind of optional, that teach you how to be a small business owner. And you kind of, you have to be a small business owner as an author in general. But you kind of learn,
a surprise to me.
Yeah, and you learn more about it as you go. Gosh, there's so many things that you kind of pick up. I guess for me, it's going back to one of the things that we talked about earlier with publishing being weird. The most helpful thing I've learned about publishing is the fact that it is, okay, this is going to sound mean, but it is a wildly unprofessional industry. Everybody's late all the time.
Yes.
Everything is subjective. It's wildly unprofessional, and that is both a blessing and a bane. It's just, because it's great when I miss a deadline.
The first time I was late for something, I was like very upset about it, and my agent was like, "It's okay, you're late. Everybody's late."
Same experience for me. Yeah, I was just so mad at myself, and my agent was like, "Dude, nobody cares. Just give them 2 weeks notice and don't be 2 years late."
That's
Like,
so funny.
yeah, and so and that's about publishing in particular. In business in general, I'd say just don't take things personally. Just it's business. Even publishing is still business. So just don't take it personally.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely learned a lot of stuff about like taxes. But before becoming an author, I I worked for software companies basically. So I always just had, I had my paycheck and I had my deductions and I, did my TurboTax and then that was the end of it. And it's so much more complicated. There's way more to do. I have an accountant now and I still have to keep track of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff to learn there. And related to the publishing business being so small, which you talked about earlier, I used to write book reviews when I was, before I was published. I had a blog or a live journal or something, and I learned not to do that, basically, because here's the thing about publishing, right? If I read a book and I'm like, oh, this book is terrible, like, why would I go online and say that it's terrible? Because not only does that book have an author, and maybe I know that author and they'll be fine with it and they don't care, or I hate them and I don't care what they think. But that book also has an editor and a publisher and a bunch of other people who worked on it, that if I'm sort of gratuitously mean to someone, then that's a small industry. People are going to remember that. And so, I've learned to follow the kind of, if you don't have anything nice to say, just be quiet. It's easy enough to just be positive about the books I really like.
Yeah, and it's like we said earlier, it's a weird industry.
It is.
And you have to kind of learn to like navigate it and not have everyone come out hating you.
That's what a good agent can help you do. I mean, in addition to their like contractual functions, they can be like, okay, this is a person you should, kiss up to, and this is a person that you need to know or whatever.
Yeah. So do you have any superstitions while writing, and has a dream ever resulted in a published work or story?
I don't know that I have superstitions as such. I have habits, which are not necessarily logical, but I feel like they help me get in the mood, basically, so that I tend to always write in the same place, and I have my playlist of music that I play, but it's more about helping clear my mind of distractions. There's no like magic to it. It's like, you're just sort of trying to tell your brain, okay, this is writing time. These are all the cues that we have for writing time. And it kind of helps you get into the mood there. So I've got my, you can see my couch behind me, and I just sit on my couch with my laptop and play music from my computer, my other computer. I used to keep a dream journal because I kept waking up and thinking, oh my God, that dream would make for such a good story, but then I would forget by the time I came to actually write it down. And so I started keeping a journal, and I would wake up and immediately write everything down, and it was all garbage. I learned that part of my brain that was like, oh yeah, that makes a really good story, is just completely lying, and it's just a bunch of crap. So I stopped doing it because I just had all these weird ideas, and I'd look at that in the light of day, and I'd be like, that doesn't make any sense. And what are you doing? I do I definitely get insights at weird times. So when I'm in the shower, or when I'm driving or whatever, I will often ooh, that would be a good thing. Then sometimes it's I got to remember that till I can safely pull over and write it down somewhere. But usually not from dreams.
I actually do have a dream one. It was I wrote a little novella that I ended up selling to Tor.com. War Cry came out.
Oh yeah, that was great.
That one was from a dream. I woke up and I had dreamt like the first third of it. I just had this kind of vague dream that was about like these army rangers on a very lonely, desolate, high plain sort of, kind of Argentine setting, but it was like kind of World War I era kind of tech, and I thought that was super cool. And so I had nothing going on, so I spent like 3 days. I wrote it, and I was like, well, this is cool, and then I sold it.
Nice.
And that was fun. And then this is one of those stories I probably shouldn't tell. But the thing I'm working on right now actually came to me about 4 months ago. I took an edible and watched a nature documentary. I'm looking
forward to this one.
No, this is pretty great because I saw this nature documentary. They showed this tarantula hunting in this kind of like a rainforest, and I had this thought, like it was one of those stupid thoughts that you get when you've taken an edible. What if like there's little teeny tiny people inside that tarantula, and what if the tarantula is mechanical and it's moving around and being controlled by very tiny people? And it kind of blossomed over the course of this watching this show. It blossomed into this idea of, okay, so what if there's this mega fauna, mega flora world that people are exploring in these giant tarantula mechs? And so it kind of has been floating around the back of my head the last 4 months, and now I'm like a sixth of the way through the book.
Nice. All right, we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions here. Let me see. Here's some quick ones. Django, I have to ask, what's your favorite Quentin Tarantino movie? It's probably Kill Bill, which is like not appropriate, but like I definitely have seen Django Unchained, of course. I've even seen there's an old 60s Western called Django, which has a great theme song. It's like Django, and yeah, look it up. It's a great song. I can't sing, but that was fun. At least everyone can spell my name. They used to ask me, like, is the Quentin Tarantino movie, like, is that about you? And I'd be like, yes, it's my biopic. Jamie Foxx as me is a bold casting choice.
That's fantastic.
Brian, when can we expect the next Valkyrie Connection book?
Oh, man. So that was supposed to be written right now, and I'm working on this other book instead. But the benefit of self-publishing is that I have no deadlines, and I only have to deal with annoyed fans. I'm fingers crossed the third one will be out by the end of the year, because I want to write it, and then I'll run a Kickstarter. I'll put it out pretty quickly, and then it'll be a little longer before the audiobook and the hardcover arrive. But hopefully, fingers crossed by the end of the year.
Someone asked, Django, what is your favorite All My Friends Are Dead story from Farrar and Ashes of the Sun? And I can't answer that off the top of my head because I don't remember them all, but that's the character I was talking about, and it's a lot of fun. So you have to read the book and decide what your favorites are. I actually also just wrote a bunch more because I just turned in the sequel, so my brain is not in the right place for that at this stage. All right, last question on the list. Do either of you see current events, the virus, politics, etc., impacting or influencing your writing in any way, themes, questions to be asked in stories, etc.?
Ooh, man.
Yeah, that's heavy.
That's super heavy. Way to end on a really good heavy one.
I know.
The book I just turned in, the God Glass book, it's very heavily influenced by the revolutions in the mid-1800s in Europe. Kind of the revolutions that Les Mis came out of. So it's very heavily influenced by that whole kings and oligarchs and crazy people trying to be.
Are you also listening to the Revolutions podcast?
Oh yeah.
I love that.
Definitely. And so honestly, as I was finishing that book, there's so many things that parallel to right now that it made me deeply uncomfortable. And so yeah, it was actually kind of tough to finish that book right now.
It's tricky. I mean, I'm not going to do anything directly. I mean, the problem with publishing is that the cycle is so long between starting a book and having it actually hit the shelves that it's really hard to be topical unless you are working in like the subgenre of like current events nonfiction, which is like specially optimized to have a faster cycle time. I know a bunch of people like Charlie Strauss and a few others who keep complaining that their near future SF keeps being overtaken by current events. Right.
Well, and I bet publishers in the last 4 months have gotten so many pitches about, science fiction where there's a plague.
Yeah.
And you're like, gosh, that's gotta be exhausting.
The problem though is that like if a book that you start today is going to be out in 2 years, are people still going to want to read plague stories 2 years from now? Like, yeah, probably not. So you know, I think all that stuff finds its way in, but like not directly, at least not for me, and I don't think for Brian.
No. It's all subconscious.
Or I think we're at an hour.
Yep, so we get it.
Are we done? Okay. Well, I'll just say thank you guys for having me. Thank you to Orbit for having us on here. And you can check out my book, Ashes of the Sun. You can buy it here. I also just signed a bunch of copies that are over at the bookstore called Third Place Books. If you would like a signed copy, they will ship it to you. Yeah, and I, you know, thank you guys all for having me. Thank you, Brian, for being on.
Oh, of course. Thanks for inviting me around for your launch week event.
And you, am I correct in that you can't like say that God Glass or any of that stuff is coming at any specific point in the future?
Yeah, no. Right now we have an idea that we want the first 2 books to be done before we put the first book into the production cycle. So it might not be out even until 2022. So it'll probably be a while. So yeah,
I will continue to look forward to it then.
Which is why I do my self-published stuff, so that I can slip other things out. But thanks, guys. Have a good one. This is great.